Welcome to the Spirit Sisters podcast, where we explore encounters beyond our world. Through interviews and storytelling, we'll reconnect with wonder, awe, eternal love, and the possibility that something greater than ourselves is always telling a story through us. Together, we'll delve into the afterlife, spiritual awakenings, near-death experiences, the journey of the soul, other lifetimes, signs and wonders, and love more powerful than death. I'm Karina Machado, and my life's passion is investigating experiences that dwell in the threshold between life and what we call death, illuminating the great mystery and carrying profound wisdom for living. These days, more than ever, I'm certain these sacred stories contain the medicine for our times. Join us around the virtual hearth and draw close for a story that might just change your life. Spirit Sisters is recorded on Darawal country. My gratitude and respect to elders past, present and emerging. You're listening to Spirit Sisters. I'm your host, Karina Machado. Thank you for joining me around the virtual hearth today for a special Halloween episode. The veil is thin this week, my friends, in the lead up to All Hallows Eve or Halloween. Perhaps you know that what we call Halloween has its roots in the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, which celebrates the end of summer on November 1 and the Celtic New Year. In the Celtic tradition, departed loved ones were expected and welcomed with offerings of their favourite foods. The Day of the Dead, famously celebrated in Mexico on November 1 and 2, picks up on this idea. In Spain on November 2, there is a tradition for families to visit the cemetery to honour their late loved ones and attend to their grave sites. Yet the story I am about to tell today is not a story about a gentle partnership between the living and the dead. It's about the myriad ways a house can be haunted, and about how those who dwell in a house may themselves be a haunted house made of flesh and bones. I'm grateful to the dear member of the Spirit Sisters community who so graciously shared her story with me. I'm in awe of her courage and her generosity in doing so. At the end of the story, the author invites me to share my thoughts, so I'll offer a reflection at the close of the reading. Please note that this episode references sexual abuse. If you need support, contact 1-800-RESPECT. I'll link to them in the show notes and you can call them on 1-800-737-732 in Australia. If you're elsewhere in the world, please seek out support services in your area. For now, I hope you have a cup of your favourite tea nestled warm between your palms as you settle in for a story which reminds us that, even in the depths of the darkest, longest night, strength of spirit and bonds of love and sisterhood shine through. The house. I begin my account of the hauntings I grew up experiencing by letting you, the listener, know that for the privacy of my siblings and family members, I have changed names and not specified the area in which the events took place. I also wish to provide a warning that issues around sexual abuse, mental health and alcoholism are touched upon. I grew up in a strict Catholic family with my parents and 9 other siblings. We were a family of low socioeconomic status, and so, as a result of this, when I was 5, we found ourselves about to be evicted from our home in what was then a small country town in Victoria, Australia. Desperate for a roof over our heads, my parents sought the most affordable housing available. The only house that they were able to afford was an old ex-Housing Commission house that was located in a slightly larger rural area, a 3-hour drive away. It was a small weatherboard house with 3 bedrooms. My parents were offered 2 ex-commission houses that they joined together to make one 5-bedroom house. They took out a loan from the bank and had both houses moved and joined together on a remote property in dense bushland in Victoria. So we moved from our small town to a tiny place with all but 3 other houses in a 40-kilometre radius. The property had no electricity or mobile phone reception, as it was situated in what is referred to as a black spot. It was an uninhabited property of 64.5 acres of the dense bushland. I was 5.5 years old when my parents moved me and my 9 siblings to this property. Although the 2 houses were joined together, it was evident that they were different in design. Both were weatherboard and old, not well-maintained houses. There were cracks in the floorboards, which we stuffed with newspaper to keep out the drafts. It was freezing, and for many years we had no fireplace or any form of heating. We used candles at night to see, and as there was no television or radio, we would play games like hide and seek, or we'd read books a lot. When we initially entered the house, the first thing we noticed was that one end of the house, which we called house number 1, was literally covered in Christian paintings, statues, and other Christian religion paraphernalia. There was a holy water font as you entered the front door, and crosses above every bedroom doorway. These things were left with the house number 1 when it was transported to the property. House number 2, which was joined to house number 1, had no such Christian paraphernalia and was bare, as one would expect of a newly purchased home. Staring at all of the strange artefacts in house number 1, I recall my mother mumbling that something felt off, but my father shrugged his shoulders and suggested that perhaps the previous owner was simply a devout Catholic. As we walked through the home for the first time, I remember feeling uneasy. I didn't want to be alone, and I held on to my little sister as we sat in what was to be the living room. I felt relieved that we had a place to live, as it had been a highly stressful time in which, as a family, we were facing homelessness. But even at the young age of 5.5, I knew that something felt very wrong about this new house. After moving in, it was decided that the 5 girls and my parents would reside in house number 1. So 2 girls in one of the bedrooms, 2 girls in the other bedroom, and the 3rd bedroom for my parents and youngest baby sister. The house number 2 had 2 boys in the 1st bedroom and the 3 other boys in the 2nd bedroom. The 2 houses were joined in the middle by the living rooms of each house, which were merged together in the middle to create one long living room. When we first began living at the property, we would notice a few strange things. However, none of us had ever spoken or had any interest in the supernatural or spirit world at that time. Although my parents were Catholic, neither had ever really given much thought to ghosts, and my father in particular was a very sceptical person. On the first week we moved into the property, my father had a neighbour, Tony, visiting. Tony's dog, Jasper, was also present, and as young children we were delighted and wanted Jasper to come inside. My father said it was fine, so we opened the front door, and in came Tony. For Jasper, however, it was a different story. The previously sweet and friendly little fox terrier abruptly came to a halt at the front doorstep and began to arch his back, bare his teeth, and let out a low growl. Jasper looked terrified, and with his tail between his legs, he appeared to be looking past us at something behind us in the house. Tony, looking very taken aback, tried to calm Jasper. Looking utterly perplexed, he rubbed his grey beard and said that he could not understand what had gotten into Jasper, as he had never before behaved in such a manner. Tony, looking bewildered, apologised, and concerned for Jasper, he scooped the little dog up and they left. A few months passed and we had begun to settle into the home. My mother was pregnant at the time with baby number 11. She was 4 months along when she suddenly miscarried. It was sad, and we all gathered around and prayed for what would have been our little sibling. We planted a willow tree outside the front of the house in memory of this loss. During this time, the emotions in the house were all very mixed. My mother was experiencing a major depressive episode and barely left her bedroom. My father was trying to fix up the rundown house and set up plumbing so that we could have running water, but he continued to run into roadblocks and unexpected costs. He was also busy replacing rotting floorboards and trying to manage all of us children as our mother was unwell. We began to notice things going missing around the house. At first, the things were small, such as my father's hammer, or a packet of nails, or a hairbrush. We all blamed one another and thought nothing of it. But bigger things began to go missing. A very large, heavy painting that had been propped up behind our old piano disappeared without a trace. We searched everywhere. My mother had treasured this painting as it had been a gift from her father. She tore frantically around the entire house, desperately searching every room, in the manhole area, under the house, every single place one could possibly think of. But the painting was gone. We all swore that we had not touched the painting, and my parents eventually gave up with no answer found. One night, around 2 months after we'd moved in, we all went to bed, only to be awoken by a loud bang followed by smashing glass. My parents got up and came into the living room of house number 1. There, on the floor, was my mother's favourite large A2-sized painting. It had somehow fallen or been thrown from somewhere, and glass from its large frame had smashed everywhere. My parents were visibly shaken. The following day, my mother cleaned up the glass and placed the painting, this time with clear purpose, behind her bedroom wardrobe against the wall. She said that when she could afford it, she would have the frame replaced with new glass. 2 days later, when my mother went to take the painting out from behind her wardrobe where she'd placed it, it was once again gone. None of us children had touched the picture, and we were not aware of where it had been placed. My father had not removed the painting. My mother was distraught, as it had meant a lot to her. From memory, it was a painting of a country scene of people walking around on a field beside a river. The painting was by an English artist named John Constable. We searched the entire house, but to no avail. My parents once again looked in the ceiling and under the house. We never found that picture, and neither of my parents were able to explain where it had once more gone. About a month passed after this without incident, and we had all forgotten about the painting. We were getting settled into our new life. We had been at the house for 3 or so months, and things felt okay. 7 of the children at the time attended school via bus. My father would drive my 5 brothers, my older sister and me all to the local bus stop about 10 kilometres away in the morning, and he'd pick us up of an evening. My 3 younger sisters were all at home and preschool age. My father worked on the land as a hobby farmer, and my mother was a stay-at-home mother looking after the 3 youngest and tending to the home. One day, not long after my father had dropped us kids at the bus stop and returned home, he was doing work in the pantry and heard a loud crash behind him and what sounded like glass shattering. Thinking that something must have knocked over, he looked around the pantry, but nothing had fallen and there was no sign of anything broken. My father said he did feel a little uneasy about the incident, but he passed it off as one of those things, and he did not tell anyone about what had happened, as he did not want any unnecessary cause for alarm, as he put it. During this time, my mother was often in the house throughout the daytime, and alone with the 3 younger children, whilst my father was out building up the land for preparation of a hobby farm. One day, my mother placed my youngest 2.5-year-old sibling, Esther, down for a nap, when not 2 minutes later, Esther began screaming and crying out hysterically, saying over and over, "Stared of the light," which means scared of the light. My mother said that she ran into the bedroom to find Esther standing in her cot crying uncontrollably. "What is wrong, Baba?" my mother asked her, to which Esther pointed at the door and cried hysterically, saying repeatedly, stared of delight, stared of delight. My mother couldn't understand as there were no lights on. We had no electricity and she had no candles going. The curtains were drawn shut and Esther was alone in her cot in a semi-darkened room. My mother assumed that Esther must have had a bad dream and soothed her and placed her back in the cot. Half an hour passed and all was okay when suddenly Esther once again began screaming and saying, stared of delight, stared of delight. My mother decided to this time sit in the room next to Esther and do her knitting. Nothing further happened and my mother didn't worry as she assumed it must have been bad dreams that Esther was having. That night, when we were all home from school and eating dinner by candlelight at the table, we suddenly heard screaming coming from Esther's cot. We all ran in and found Esther clinging to the cot, hysterically screaming. She was red in the face and shaking. She kept pointing to a place above the doorway and saying again and again, stared of delight. My parents didn't say anything, but they looked worried. This became a regular occurrence, to the point that in the end my parents would have to go in and sit next to Esther while she was napping. When my parents sat in the bedroom with Esther while she slept, she never woke up and nothing ever occurred. When I recall this incident, I'm reminded of details my parents shared with me regarding this bedroom. One evening when I was a teenager and we were discussing the events that had taken place in the house, my father recited the following. Around 2 weeks after living in the house, one evening we had all gone to bed and we were sound asleep. Your mother was the only person awake at the time and she was sitting up in bed listening to her battery-operated radio on low volume. It was around 11:40 p.m. when your mother said that she heard a loud crashing noise coming from the living room area. I had been woken by the noise but was unsure what had caused me to jump up startled. Your mother whispered frantically that someone must be in the house. We both got out of bed and ran to see what the noise was. When we entered the lounge room, both of us saw something unexplainable. There, wedged high up in the doorway of your and your sister's bedroom, was a full black, heavy leather, singular lounge suite, the one matching to our 3-seater lounge room couch. It was jammed so hard in the doorway that both your mother and I struggled to unwedge it. It was above the floor and wedged right in the middle of the doorway. Both your mother and I were shaking. We were shocked that none of you children awoke with the sound of the crash we had both heard when the chair had been thrown. My father told me that me and my little sister Claire were both fast asleep in the bedroom where this lounge chair had been wedged in our doorway. He checked on my other 2 sisters, Katie and Ella, who were in the room next to mine, and they too were fast asleep. He then checked on my brothers, Jake, Vince and Ansel in one room, and Peter and Duncan in the other, but he found that all of my brothers at the house end were soundly sleeping. No one except my parents had heard the crash. My parents placed the chair back where it had previously been situated, some 2.5 meters across the other side of the living room. My father said that when they were sure we were all asleep and safe, he and my mother returned to bed but could not get back to sleep and sat up talking about it for a lot of the night. The next day, my parents were talking about what had happened amongst themselves and trying to find rational solutions. My father asked each of my older brothers to try and lift the lounge suite chair and to throw it as far as they could. However, not one of my older brothers was strong enough to even lift the chair more than a few centimetres off the ground, let alone throw it. We all felt confused by what had happened. Despite this, my father refused to believe that it was anything paranormal, and when my mother questioned this idea, my father scoffed and said that there was no such thing as ghosts, and that perhaps there had been some strange earthquake or something. My mother argued that this made no sense at all, as nothing else in the house had moved, and further to this, there was no known earthquakes recorded in the area. In the end, we all tried our best to accept it as a strange occurrence and continue living in the home as per normal. My father was working on the house a lot the following few months. It was summer, and he was trying to get as much done as possible before winter hit again. He wanted us to be warm and for the house to be better insulated. There was a lot of hammering and sawing and sanding of walls. During this period, things became a lot worse in the home, and Katie and Ella began seeing things at night. The first time it happened, Katie, who was 4.5 years old, woke the entire house one night, screaming. My parents ran in to find her sobbing and shaking. She said that she had seen a green lamp in her room. My parents soothed her and told her it was just a bad dream. Night after night, for the next 12 to 18 months, Katie and Ella would wake the house screaming and terrified. Each time I would remember them sobbing and saying that they had seen a green lamp above their bedroom door, or an older man walking in their bedroom carrying a lantern. He would not appear to notice or acknowledge their presence, but would walk in a single line down the side of the bedroom and out the bedroom door. Both my sisters said that the man had heavy boot steps and was a big man with old clothes and a gruff-looking, bearded face. Katie was so terrified that she began refusing to get up at night to go to the toilet. She developed severe toiletry issues as a consequence. Ella had also begun wetting the bed, and she became very nervous and jumpy. My parents kept telling Katie and Ella that they were both having bad dreams and that there was nothing to be afraid of. During this time, I had not witnessed anything. I was around 7.5 years old when I had a first-hand encounter with something unexplainable and scary. I had witnessed the fear and heard the tales from Katie and Ella every morning for over 18 months. It had gotten to the point that whenever they mentioned it, my parents would immediately shut them down and tell them to stop talking about it and that there was no such thing as ghosts. Katie and Ella have since told me how alone they felt during that time. My sister Katie became so fearful that she would sleep with heavy blankets over her head. My father would come in to find her drenched in sweat and overheated every morning. She was traumatized and terrified. Both of them were. During this period of time, I was also going through an unspoken trauma of my own. Apart from the strange things occurring in the home, I was experiencing another kind of horror. I didn't share this with anyone at the time, and it had at that point been occurring for several years. I was extremely protective of my younger siblings and frightened of what would happen to them or my family as a unit if I said anything. One day I gathered all of my fear, confusion, anger, and what tiny little bit of courage I could find, and I threatened to tell someone what this man was doing to me. In response, this adult male grabbed me by my forearm, squeezed both my cheeks between his other hand, looked into my face and said, "If you ever tell anyone, I swear to you I will come into your home, enter your room late at night, and I will kill you." Then he finished by promising me that he was going to do something awful to scare me as a punishment for having made any threat to tell on him. To say that I was petrified would be an understatement. I kept my mouth very tightly shut, and I slowly began to become more and more introverted, sad, and closed off from everyone. This man was loved and respected by everyone, and so I thought that what was happening was surely my fault. I deserved what was happening, I was bad, and I was being punished. These were the thoughts I would continue to carry with me throughout my childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood. I carried a heavy load for a little girl, and it weighed deeply on my psyche. I feared what this man was going to do to me. Would he hurt my pet guinea pigs, Tweedledee and Tweedledum? Would he harm my sisters? Would he tell everyone what had been happening, and would I go to jail and be ostracized from the family? On reflection, these thoughts sound absurd. As an adult, I know I was 100% not at fault for the sexual abuse I experienced. As a child, adolescent, and young adult, I carried the weight of this man's shame, guilt, and blame, and I imagined all sorts of things that might happen if others were ever to learn of the truth. In the end, only one of my fears came to fruition. I was ostracized by a large proportion of my family, not because they believed I was in the wrong or because they did not love me in their own way, but because it was far easier to push away the problem, me, than to have to face what had taken place. For the 3 siblings who have remained in my life, I am forever grateful. Over the next few months, there continued to be other occurrences in the home, such as crucifixes above our bed were flung off the walls in front of us. It was not uncommon that we would hang them back up only to re-enter the room and either have them flung towards us off the wall or to find them lying face down on the floor under our beds or flung onto the end of the bed itself. One evening, my older brother Ansel was doing his homework, seated at the kitchen table in the house number 1 part of the home. He had his school bag in the middle of the 1.5 metre table directly to his left. Ansel said that he saw his school bag and all of his books drag across from the left-hand side of the table to the right-hand side of the table. Then he said he observed his school bag and books all go flying off the end of the table at lightning speed and scatter about the kitchen floor. He was so terrified and came running to our parents and several of us siblings who were seated around the living room. He was as pale as a sheet and shaking when he explained what had happened. I have never seen Ansel so distressed as he was that evening. On another occasion, I was sitting up in bed one night. I was around 7.5 years old. I don't know what time it was, but it was late, as everyone in the house had already gone to bed and were asleep. I had been sitting up under my blanket, reading one of my favourite books by Enid Blyton. She was my favourite author as a child. I had been using my blue bananas in pyjamas torch to read, and the battery was starting to go flat and began blinking on and off. Eventually there was no battery left, and I gave up and popped my bookmark in and tucked the book under my pillow. I placed the torch next to me and rolled over to go to sleep. I remember feeling tired, but I wasn't able to fall asleep. I had the feeling that somebody was watching me, and my hair on my neck and arms was standing on end. I remember then opening my eyes, and to my absolute terror, I found myself staring into the most horrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. I say thing because this was not human by any means. I was frozen. I felt unable to move. I could not scream or close my eyes or do anything. I wanted to. I was petrified and felt as though this awful, cold dread was slowly spreading through my entire body. I lay there unable to move as I watched this black figure in front of me. It had the most evil, glowing, fiery red eyes and was the blackest of black. I remember that the way in which the eyes looked at me, flickering and dancing only 0.5 metre from my face, it almost felt as though they were mocking me. That was the feeling I experienced washing over me, one of mocking cruelty and deep, dark evil. I was so afraid, and for a moment a sudden thought entered my head. Was this the punishment I was experiencing from the man that was hurting me? I remember in my mind asking, "Is that you?" Though surely some part of me must have known it could not possibly be him, because this thing was not human, and no man could have created whatever this thing before me was. Yet I questioned the power of this man, and I remembered his threat to me, in which he said he planned to scare me. The experience felt like an eternity, and I felt this evil entity in front of me, so close to me. My chest began to feel heavy, and a deep sense of overwhelming dread and pain entered me. I felt anger, malice, and the closest I have ever come to pure evil. Eventually, after perhaps 5 minutes or so, the entity disconnected its fiery red glowing eye contact with mine, and I suddenly felt able to move. I was still too terrified to scream or do anything. I managed to throw my heavy blankets over my head, and I curled tightly into myself whilst willing the thing to go away. I stayed like this all night, I was beyond traumatized and did not sleep. The following morning, my father came in and found me under the blankets, still awake and terrified. I had wet the bed and was shaking. I wasn't able to tell anyone what had happened. I felt so afraid. I felt as though I was floating outside of myself, as if I was somewhere far away. I couldn't speak and I was barely able to function. For 2 weeks following this incident, I was mute. I stopped speaking at home and at school. I stopped eating and I wasn't able to sleep well anymore. I began bedwetting and was hiding under my blankets every night in fear. I did not speak to anyone about the incident. I didn't even tell my parents, as part of me was still fearful that the man who was abusing me at the time may have somehow been responsible. One day, around 2 weeks after the incident, I was in the toilet cubicles at school and everything hit me. I saw in my mind the mocking, fiery red eyes and felt the intense despair and deep dread inside my chest, and I collapsed on the cubicle floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The school principal, Mr. Barnell, was alerted by a fellow student, and I was scooped up and taken to his office. He listened without judgment as I told him all about the fiery, glowing, mocking red eyes and the other paranormal experiences that had been taking place in the home. He listened, and he looked at me with such love and kindness, and for the first time in years, I felt heard and safe. After this, Mr. Barnell drove me out to my family home, a good 60-minute drive, as there was no way to contact my parents to ask that they pick me up from school. No phone or working technology in my home. We arrived and Mr. Barnell brought me inside where my parents sat with him and spoke about all that had been happening. They verified all of what I had told him about the man with the lantern and the other strange happenings in the house. The principal then explained to my parents what I had told him that I had seen. He explained that this was why I had stopped speaking and eating and what had made me so upset. My mother covered her hands over her mouth and looked horrified. My father too looked deeply concerned and hugged my mother and I. He agreed with Mr. Barnell that this was serious and that something needed to be done. My father was advised to contact the local parish's church priest and to explain what was happening. My parents were also advised to send me to a church-based counsellor for therapeutic support, as I was so clearly traumatised by what I had experienced. The following Sunday, my parents did both. They spoke with the local priest, Father David, and arranged for me to start seeing a church counsellor named Todd, who came down to see me from the nearest city parish once a week. Todd was kind and compassionate, and he helped me to feel comfortable enough to talk to him about what I had seen. I was very scared, as I had overheard my mother telling my father that it sounded as if I had seen the devil itself. I told Todd that I was scared of this devil coming back to get me. Todd smiled sympathetically and taught me a prayer to recite when I felt afraid. He promised me that this prayer would keep me safe. It was called Angel of God. I still remember it. O Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love permits me here, forever this day be at your side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. I remember asking Todd, what if I saw the evil thing at night and the prayer only said to protect me in the daytime? Todd smiled and told me that I could change the prayer to include nighttime too. I felt stronger knowing that I had a prayer that I could say, either out loud or in my mind, that would protect me. Father David attended the home the following week and walked through our house reciting certain paragraphs from the Bible. He blessed the house and blessed each of the family members with holy water. Although he did this, he appeared nervous and couldn't wait to get out of the house and off the property. His blessing and prayers did not work, and the hauntings and strange events continued. One day, many weeks after the failed house blessing, one of my brothers, Vince, was resting in the afternoon on the living room 3-seater couch. He was home from school as he was recovering from glandular fever, and it was mid-afternoon. He said that he was alert and awake and could see a man standing in the living room staring at a picture of Jesus that was hung on the wall. He described the man as being see-through in appearance and said that he was wearing old-fashioned clothes. Vince said that the man had his back to him and just stood staring at the painting of Jesus on the wall. When Vince went to yell out, the man disappeared and there was a white mist for some time afterwards in the place he had been standing. Vince also said that during this time, when he was almost fully recovered from the glandular fever, he saw a mist in his doorway leading from the house one end to the house two end. Vince described it as looking like white thick mist that filled the doorway. At the time it was late afternoon and our mother was in the kitchen making soup for Vince. In the kitchen my mother said that she felt a coldness touch her firmly on the shoulder. She then reported that she came out of the kitchen and asked Vince, "Did you just come into the kitchen and tap me on the shoulder?" Vince replied, "No, Mum, I didn't." In another incident late one night, my mother was lying in bed and heard footsteps descending from outside her bedroom door all the way to the front door and along the veranda. However, when she got up, she found that everybody was asleep in bed and the front door remained closed. Another night, both my parents were awake and reported hearing rustling noises coming from inside their bedroom wardrobe. My mother said she leaned over the side of the bed to find her torch. When she found it and looked back up, my father looked shaken. He said that while she was looking for the torch, he had seen a green glow above the doorway. He said it was luminescent and disappeared within seconds. My parents often wonder in hindsight if this was the light that my baby sister had been referring to when she would wake up screaming in her cot and saying, "Stared of delight," as this was the same room in which she had slept at that time. In another incident, my brother Jake said he had seen a man in the kitchen with a long beard, mid-length shorts and desert boots on. He was wearing an old shirt and pointing a knife at Jake. Jake was around 11 at the time and said that he had been standing in front of the gas bottle stovetop making a hot cocoa when the man appeared. Directly following the incident, Jake came into the lounge, stood in the doorway for a few moments and appeared pale and stunned. He stood there staring, and our mother asked, "What is wrong, Jake?" He then burst into tears, sobbing, and explained what he'd seen. My parents were trying to calm Jake, but he was inconsolable and so very distressed. Our father went to look in the kitchen and nothing was there. Jake said at the time that he felt that this was a very bad man and that he wanted to harm him. A year to the day of this incident, Jake became severely unwell and required an urgent organ transplant. Jake often says that he's still not sure if this was a pre-warning or a threat that something was going to happen, as the man he had seen had been pointing a knife out towards the area in which the organ was in Jake's body. My mother disclosed to me years later that she used to get up at night and feel as though she was being watched. She said that she did not feel that house was her own, but rather felt it had been taken over by evil spirits. My mother decided to try to research the house. She wrote to the local shire to try and trace what might have happened in the house. They advised my mother that they were not aware of what might have happened in the house and had no idea who the previous occupants had been. She continued to research local newspapers dating back to the time when the house had been in its original location, but there was no news regarding any murders occurring in the area or anything else. We all felt that something had definitely happened in the house, as the previous tenant who had lived there had placed the holy water fonts, Christian paraphernalia and the holy pictures everywhere. It had felt strange at the time that there were so many religious artefacts, as if whoever resided there had been trying to protect themselves. It was also strange that whoever resided there appeared to have left the property suddenly, as a lot of other personal belongings remained in the property. At times we all wondered if the land was also haunted, as we would at times see things rush up to our legs and disappear whilst we were outside. We had a psychic lady once attend the home, and she said that she felt there was activity on the property outside the house as well as inside the house. I recall so many things that happened on that property and in that house. I had a musical box that I cherished, and often, late at night, it would start playing on its own for a long time, even though I always ensured that the lid on the music box was closed. I also remember when I was 14, I was sitting at my desk one evening doing my homework in my bedroom. I remember feeling like it was ice cold, and I popped on my coat and woolen hat. I had a candle burning next to me for light, as we still had no electricity. Suddenly, while I was mid-sentence reading something out aloud, I heard a distinct sound to the right of me next to my ear. It sounded like someone blowing out a birthday candle. I was left in pitch darkness, the candle blown out. I grabbed the candle and quickly ran out to the living room and relit it. I was scared to go back into my room to work, but there were no other desks or places I could work from that were available. After about 30 minutes had passed and I felt brave again, I went back into my room and popped the candle back on my desk and began doing my homework again. No sooner had I done this than once again I felt someone very clearly, this time behind my left ear, blow out the candle. I raced out of the room and told my parents what happened. They remained silent and let me sit on the floor and finish my homework in the lounge room next to them. The priest, Father David, re-attended the property to bless the home at least 7 more times over the 10 years we experienced continuing paranormal activity and ghostly apparitions in the home. When my parents told him about the armchair being wedged in the bedroom door, Father David wondered if it was possible that a cow or calf had somehow managed to get under the house, bump the floorboards to make the chair move. This would have been physically impossible, as you would be required as a human to wriggle on hands and knees to get under the house, let alone a cow being able to fit. For a few days after a blessing, the activity would stop, but it would always start up again. Eventually, another priest, Father Ryan, from a parish that was a 5-hour drive from our property, heard of our plight and how we were trapped in this house due to low socioeconomic circumstances. He said that he very much felt for our story and the situation we had found ourselves living in. He agreed to perform an exorcism on the house. All of us went around the house with him and 3 other members of the clergy who joined in as he exorcised the home. It was a surreal experience and not exactly like what you might see on a Hollywood movie. Father Ryan spoke in Latin for a lot of it. He wore his robes, carried a wooden cross, holy water, and swung an instrument to and fro as he worked. It had thick smoke that released as he swung it, and it was ornately covered in gold and intricate symbols. The smoke had a distinct smell, although I cannot say what that was. At one point, Father Ryan began praying loudly and forcefully, demanding for all spirits, entities and demons to leave this family in peace and return from where they came. He clutched his wooden cross, and one of the clergy began to fling holy water around every corner of the house. Father Ryan became red in the face from raising his voice and praying, and he appeared to be exerting a lot of energy from within. Later he disclosed to us all that he had felt an entity pushing at his chest and making him feel nauseous. This entire process took between 1.5 to 2 hours and was a lot more intense than the 15-minute house blessing we had received over the years from Father David. It takes several months of planning for a Catholic priest to perform an exorcism on a home. My parents told me that Father David and Father Ryan had to provide documented evidence to the bishop of why an exorcism was required. The bishop then had to take this further up the line and advocate for it to occur, and so on and so forth. I was 15 years old when this exorcism took place. I hadn't been exposed to television or Hollywood movies about exorcisms, and honestly had no idea what to expect. I remember feeling scared and that there was a palpable fear all around us as the exorcism was carried out. Father Ryan had prepared us all prior to it taking place. He told us to all follow him holding hands and praying the Lord's Prayer. We all carried a small white porcelain cross on our body, either in our hand or in our pockets, and we were instructed not to stop praying either in our minds or out loud. As cliched as this will most definitely sound, afterwards everyone felt a certain peace over the property, and that there was a slight lift of tension from the home. Following this, despite none of us ever feeling very comfortable in the house, the activity in the house did cease. Father Ryan and his clergy had taken the time to not only exorcise the house, but also all of the immediate surrounding bushland, an acre in every direction from the house. We all remained somewhat fearful in the home, and none of us ever truly believed that whatever had been responsible for the hauntings had fully left. But instead, we felt that whatever had been in the home was somehow made dormant, as if it was still present, but unable to act it out. My life growing up in this haunted property was not an easy one. My father drank too much as a coping mechanism for the overwhelming pressure he had to carry. My mother was very mentally unwell and unstable and heavily relied on me as the most mature of her daughters to support her emotionally, as well as to take on the emotional and physical care needs of my younger sisters. I often have thought that it may have been all of these factors, together with the ongoing sexual abuse I experienced from ages 5 to 12, that may have provided a perfect storm in which the evil in this house was able to feed upon. Our family, for all appearances, seemed perfect, and yet I can say that in many regards it is one of the most dysfunctional families I have ever come across, which, from the perspective of my current occupation as a counsellor, speaks volumes. Despite everything, there is one gift I carry from the experiences we endured growing up in a haunted house: the certainty, without any doubt, that there is indeed life beyond our physical realm. Past the veil, we live on. As a now 36-year-old, I am not at all religious. However, I cannot deny that a religious-based practice of an exorcism did appear to cease what was occurring in the home. I am yet to fully understand what all of this means, if it means anything. I do wonder, what does Karina think? Thank you for listening to the story. So, I'm invited to share some thoughts, and I'm going to do so just sort of off the cuff and unscripted, as if I'm just gathering with you all around the virtual hearth with my cuppa in hand. So, firstly, again, I'd like to extend my thanks to the beautiful spirit sister who kindly took the time to note down this very long and detailed account of a very traumatic period in her life. And I know that she's somebody who wishes to extend love and support, and she does so professionally as well as within her personal life. And I know that if there's anybody who's experiencing similar trauma, pain, haunting, that she would want you to know you're not alone. And that's always my purpose too with the Spirit Sisters podcast, to remind everybody who's listening that they're not alone. The first thing that struck me listening, well, firstly when I read it, was that obviously there is poltergeist activity going on in the home with that incredibly chilling episode of the single lounge chair being wedged in the doorway of the story keeper's room. It's so interesting how poltergeist activity has these hallmarks of awkwardly placed items, being discovered in unlikely places. And I've heard stories like this before. I've read about them. I've interviewed people who've had similar encounters. And I think when poltergeist activity is dominant in a home, there is often, and again I'm drawing on my experience of interviewing people who've shared first-hand stories of their experiences of this. And what I've gathered over the years is that very often there are certain traits, and one is a big family. Many children will contribute apparently to heightening the possibility that such a thing might happen. Also, when there are untapped psychic gifts within the children of a family, well, this just increases the likelihood that a form of energy that we do not readily recognize or understand on the earth plane may manifest in a home. And the other thing that struck me was the trauma that the story keeper was experiencing. I have found this before, and there are stories in my books that have similar echoes, that have echoes of this story. One I'm thinking of is in Spirit Sisters. It was about a house in regional Australia, also in regional Australia, There weren't multiple children in this home, but the young woman, well, a young girl when the activity began, was also experiencing abuse and also had untapped psychic gifts, as I believe the story keeper in this account that we have shared today would agree that she also has some psychic gifts and her siblings as well, potentially. And also, I have interviewed people in the past who have experienced seeing a terrifying vision, just as our story keeper has shared, that vision of what appears to be evil incarnate during what could be an episode of sleep paralysis, which, as we know, is far more complex than a medical condition. It goes beyond that. In my research over the years, I've encountered nuances of the sleep paralysis experience in many stories that have been shared with me from people who've experienced paranormal phenomena firsthand. And so that was an interesting thing as well. But what I really wanted to highlight was that what the story keeper saw strikes me as a manifestation of the pure dread and fear that was alive in her in that moment, all unexpressed, all just within her simmering away like a powder keg. And so I agree with the story keeper that the sexual abuse she experienced for all of those years from between the ages of 5 and 12 indeed laid the foundation, or created, as she described it, a perfect storm in which these energies were able to take hold. As for the question of whether these energies are sentient, malicious energies, or whether it is a reflection of a traumatized and fearful inner state, well, that I think is one of the most important questions in this whole inquiry, and I certainly don't have the answer. I think it's something for us to continue to explore together. It's very interesting that the house came already with all of this religious paraphernalia, indicating perhaps, as the story keeper hinted at, that the previous owner left very quickly, having left some belongings behind, and also had already tried to perhaps assuage some sort of energy by placing these religious artifacts all over the home. So that would seem to indicate that the dwelling itself came with something already within there. And then there's the idea that the land itself potentially carried some fearful energy. It's quite interesting that the house wasn't placed there. It came from elsewhere. So it would be interesting to know where it came from and what happened there. And the mother in this story tried to research those details and didn't get very far. The other piece to touch on is the question posed at the end, that a religious-based practice of an exorcism did appear to stop what was occurring in the house. I'm invited to ponder this, and I would say that potentially it is our collective understanding, whether it's subconscious or whether it's conscious in our minds, but a collective understanding that such a thing is supposed to help. And it was a long and drawn-out exorcism, much more detailed than the previous attempts, and all of those attempts as well, 7, that's extraordinary, that the other parish priest did. Potentially the conviction of belief in this other priest that came from 5 hours away, determined with his intention of wanting to support this family who's been going through so much. Potentially all of that combined with all of the family together, drawn together in the combined purpose of drawing these events to a close, that could all have been a factor as well. And the understanding that such a ritual is intended to achieve these ends. Obviously, it's impossible to know how everything works. But as I said, we continue in our inquiry. And I think what I'd like to conclude my reflection on today is this idea that the story keeper shares, that despite everything, there is a gift, and that's her word, a gift, that she takes from these experiences that she endured growing up in this haunted house. And it's the certainty that without any doubt there is life after death, that we go on, that we are more than our bodies. That's a profound act of courage to have endured all of that and to still take away this positive message that will support herself and her family and others going forward. And certainly she supported all of us listening today to her story to remember that we are more than our bodies and that hope endures. Hope endures. Before I sign off, I have a postscript to share that is a testament to that idea. Just before publishing the episode, I received the okay from Sarah, the author of this story, to share her first name with you all. Sarah has continued to walk through a profoundly challenging life journey. And yet, she is one of the strongest people I know, someone who embodies a deep tenderness and kindness within her strength. She says, "My late sister would be so proud and happy with me for finally sharing our experience of growing up in the haunted house. She always wanted me to find a way to share it with the world through my writing. Like me, she felt it would release the deep trauma unspoken if we could just speak what we went through out loud." Thank you, Sarah, for healing with your pen, for telling us your story today. And thank you to all of you who gathered around the virtual hearth with us today. Happy Samhain, friends. May wonder, awe, and love more powerful than death dance with you upon the threshold between worlds this week. Thank you for listening to Spirit Sisters. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. And don't forget to rate and review the show. Have an experience you'd like to share with me? Get in touch at my website, carinamachado.com, or find me on Facebook at Carina Machado Author. After all, there's nothing more powerful than a story.